welcome to Moments with Marianne. I'm so delighted we're spending this time here today. We have a powerful show coming up with two amazing women. Our first guest today is Deborah Santana, and she's here to talk to us about her new book, All the Women in My Family Sing. Now, Deborah is an author, business manager, and activist for peace and social justice. Her nonprofit, Doolittle, serves women and girls in the areas of health, education, and happiness. So let's welcome to the show, Deborah.
Thank you so much, Marianne.
Oh, what a joy it is to have you here, and what a fabulous book. You must have had so much fun getting this together.
It was fun, and, attention to detail and trying to make sure everything's perfect is quite an effort. But yes, it's such a joyous compilation of phenomenal women telling their stories and sharing what it means to be a woman of color in the world today.
Well, and so what was the main inspiration behind this book?
One of my very dear friends, Chris Bronstein, has had a publishing company, Nothing But the Truth, for 5 years. And she only publishes women. But she started doing research about women of color being published, working in publishing, and saw that the opportunities are very limited for women of color. The publishing industry is one of the largest in the world, with over $37 billion in sales in 2017, larger than music, larger than film. However, 79% in the publishing industry identify as white in the overall industry. And in the editorial departments, 82% identify as white. So when she read those statistics, she was concerned that her publishing company change starts where you sit yourself. And so she wanted to create an anthology completely published, edited, marketed, graphic design, cover design, all done by women of color. But since she is not of color, she asked me if I would become co-publisher with her on this
work on that. Wow. Yeah. Well, and you have some just phenomenal stories in this book. You have, how many women was it again that you had that contributed articles to this?
Well, for the final draft, there are 69 authors in the book, but we had over 300 submissions.
Oh, my goodness. With that many, I wouldn't be surprised if there's a book, too, in the works at some point.
Oh, for sure. Especially now that people have heard about the book. Many have said, oh, I have a story, which I love.
Well, and it's so timely, too, especially with the women's movement really being heard at this point, to also have a book, regarding women of color and having that not only heard, but just broadcast so well. You have to be so proud of that.
I'm grateful. It's been many centuries of women striving to be heard, to be believed, to have a seat at the table, to come into positions of leadership and power. So this book is really nothing that's new for women, especially women of color. However, at this time, when we started this process, when I began reading essays 3 years ago, we were happily ensconced in the Obama era, and we had no idea how our world would change. And I believe that in this time, when our country is more divided than ever, our world is more divided than ever, and civil rights are being challenged, boundaries are inflicted on us by this system that has been in power for so long, that it's really timely because the stories are personal. It's not academic so that someone can't identify with Tammy Thea's story about leaving the Cambodian killing fields, or with Marian Wright Edelman's story about her mentors we can identify now in a way that we never were able to identify before. And I hope that men read the book and they can begin to identify with these stories and listen to the hearts of these women.
It's such an important message, and it's interesting. I've had friends that are men that have come up to me in regards to just like what some women have to put up in regards to sexual harassment at work, and go, that stuff really happens. So to bring things to the forefront and to address them really starts where things start to change.
Exactly, and I think that it's interesting because we really want this anthology to be stories of healing. We don't want to continue to hack the sledgehammer at everything that's wrong, because privilege prevents people from understanding what's wrong. And our system of government, our system of patriarchy, all of these systems, the institutionalized racism, have put people in power, and sometimes those people are just blind. They don't understand why they have the power. They don't understand the history, because our country has also sort of created a mythology around the history of America. America the Great. Well, America, it was begun by the decimation of the native peoples. And since that's not taught in schools, there's so much of our population that does not understand why these movements have been going on for so long, for civil rights, for Me Too, for women being protected from sexual violence. All of these movements have been in place for decades. But it is difficult for people in the positions of privilege where they're not challenged to change the way they treat others to continue this and perpetuate this unequal system.
Well, and for our listeners, I mean, I know a lot of people know who you are. You've got such a diverse background. You've done so many things because you're an author, you've been a business manager. Why don't you share a little bit about your background with our listeners?
Oh, of course. I was very fortunate to be born in San Francisco, California, which is a much more liberal part of the country, especially when I was born in the 1950s. My parents are biracial, my mom Irish-English, my dad African-American, and they married in 1947 when it was still illegal in 17 states of our union for interracial marriage. So my mom was obviously a feminist, a strong woman, a woman who followed her own mind and her heart, to enter into a relationship with a man who she would be spit on just by standing next to him in that time. So I was raised with this wonderful, wonderful sense of you do what is right in your life, and you have to steel yourself against people who would try to oppress you or malign you or marginalize you because of your choices. And I was raised in a spiritual home where we had great faith in God, and my paternal grandparents started a church in Oakland, so we had this strong Christian sense of righteousness and sense of caring for others, not the Christianity that is dogmatic and says you must believe this in order to get to heaven, but this sense of we care for each other. We are here to promote the lives of everyone. So I had this really strong foundation, and yet I definitely felt the isolation of racism and the purview of others looking at our family as being so different and not understanding and hating us because we were so different. So that ancestry of liberation theology and civil rights and working for the rights of all, it was really in my DNA.
It sounds like it, and man, what a strong woman your mother was. I mean, she had just such great presence and courage. I love hearing about stories about strong women.
Yes.
Yeah, had come, have that background. Well, and this isn't your first book. You actually have written another book, this Space Between the Stars, My Journey to an Open Heart. And so for our listeners that, also kind of want to dive into other literary works you've done, that was your first book that came out. Did I get that correct?
Yes. I wrote my memoir, and it was published in 2005 by Ballantine, a division of Random House. And that was such a journey. I had always been a writer, and I certainly at that time was writing for our family company and writing newsletters for the family business. But I had this longing, just this deep longing to write a book. So I started with Melba Beals, who's quite an established and accomplished memoirist and author, who wrote a book about the integration of Little Rock High School. And so I was able to be in a writing workshop with her for, I guess about 4 years. And I began this journey to writing my own story, not knowing that it would be my link to my own freedom in my life, because I was not really living my own life. I was really living my former spouse's life as musical manager of his band Santana. So I had raised these 3 beautiful children. I was in the process of raising them and being room mom and helping to manage the business, but I had this longing to tell my own story. So I began working on my memoir, and it took me 7 years to complete it and get a publisher and to go out on the road and promote my own story.
That must have been just so empowering, because working in kind of in the background, making sure everything runs smoothly and is so successful for for Santana, and then being able to go and kind of step into your own must have been just a glorious time.
It was really fun. I did so many book events, and I didn't have really the confidence when I started. I actually worked with a media coach because I was a little bit frightened that I would go out and start speaking about myself, and people would come back at me with questions. Well, why did you do that? Why did you do that? Why did you make that choice? Mm-hmm. And that wasn't a good choice. And because I also felt I had kind of denied myself the freedom to be educated and to do the literary works that I wanted to participate in, and I hadn't finished my BA until I got my divorce. I mean, all of these things that I felt had minimalized my own power. When I went out on my book tour, no one asked me those questions. Everyone was so receptive, and I became a type of comedian out there. I loved interacting with the people at the book signings, and I really did become more in love with myself.
Well, and it's something that so many women can relate to, where, I've have many friends who have done the same thing, where, women often will take a back seat in a relationship in regards to following their own dreams, to support the household or to support the overall cause. And, it's so nice to be able to follow your heart and be able to, do what you're meant, what you're here to do.
Yes, and I believe everything is developmental. I believe we really have a path that we have to take, and that really no path is wrong. Even if we're hurt by it, or we make choices because we have to evolve. I believe that, and I know that I did. I did the best I could at every moment of my life. I made the best choices that I was informed to make. I was able to make the progress I needed to make, and then all of a sudden I had a little burst, or rather a big burst, of coming into my own. But I do believe everything is God's timing.
Oh, I agree with you. In fact, it reminds me of a quote. I had a friend tell me a long time ago, if the ocean's salvation, there are many rivers that lead to it. And so it kind of goes along with what you're saying, that, we have to have these experiences, because it really does develop who it is that we become.
Absolutely. And sometimes we have to burn off karma. I mean, I don't know a lot about karma, but I try not to look back with regret or disdain. I try to glance in the rearview mirror and say, oh, I experienced that, but I try not to live in blame or shame. So it's really important that I have some type of spiritual understanding that everything I experienced was for my highest good.
Mm. Well, I'm sure people are just going to gobble up both of your books, my goodness, with a story like that, because it's so human, and we all can relate to that. And it kind of brings me to my next question for you. How would you describe all the women in my family seeing? How would you describe that to our listeners?
Oh, gosh, that's a great question. I would describe it as the songs of individual women who are extremely accomplished, telling their stories about what it means to be a woman of color in the world today. And they talk about pressures from being vice presidents of Fortune 500 companies, to escaping the killing fields of Cambodia, to the struggles inside immigration, and talk also about health and challenges in health issues that happen with children or with themselves, as well as identity and romance. So it's such a broad spectrum of voices.
You've got stories that everyone can at one point or another identify with or relate to. I think that one of the beauties of this anthology is that the stories are very personal, and we do want, the intention of the book is to show everyone that we are more alike than we are different. One of the issues with the lack of diversity in the publishing industry or in the film industry or in the roles of CEOs in corporations, when we do not have many voices, we do not allow everyone to experience what is truth. And so of these women, 69 of them, 59 have undergraduate and graduate degrees, 10 hold MFAs, 6 have law degrees, 5 are PhDs, and 1 is a Fulbright scholar. So these are highly educated women who write these essays, and yet their stories go right to the heart, and they show what happens in a world where people are marginalized. And we want to stop that. We want people to sit at a table and everyone holds space. We don't want to have the colonizer directing the people of color saying, oh, you can tell your story now. No, we want there to be a plane of equality. And that's what we hope this anthology does, that it opens hearts and shows people that creativity, dignity, all of these issues can build bridges to healing. I would agree with you on that. I mean, if we don't have different voices at the table, how are we going to grow our perspective?
Mm-hmm. And it's difficult. It's difficult to listen to people, especially if they're talking about how they've been hurt by a system of privilege. And so one of the ways that I've really enjoyed all of our book events is that all of the people in the audience begin to hear. Some people listen with tears in their eyes because they relate to what has happened to a certain person who's reading. Other people, I can see their faces change as they awaken to think, oh my gosh, I had no idea you could possibly experience something like that in the world today. So this is really wonderful, and I've just loved being in the book events where people are reading their stories.
Well, and I think it's so brave to write about these different stories. I mean, even within my own lifetime, I'm Portuguese-Irish. And, we've had, when I was a kid, we were turned away from a cafe because my stepdad and my sisters were too dark. So you look at this and it's just like, what the heck? That still happens? And, harassed at a event because, the color of their skin. And so you look at this and you're like, I can't believe this this is still happening, this is still going on, and it really is, and people don't realize that that's something we need to be made aware of.
Exactly, and it's hard because for those of us who have been, like you, in this battle for so many decades, there is a bit of fatigue. There's battle fatigue. Mm-hmm. Oh my gosh, I've told this story so many times. But it's like being a teacher. You know, you get new students every year and you have to teach the same course. And you can't give up and say, oh my gosh, I've taught those other kids this course. Why should I teach more kids the same information? And it's really like that in awakening people to discrimination and to patriarchy and to a system of oppression. We have to keep telling the story. And so for me, with every book event, I try to think of a new way to tell the story, a new way to come in so that I don't continue to use the same words because it's going to be a different audience. And so in that way, it's a very, very dynamic process of sticking with opening people's minds and hearts.
Well, I'm sure when you do that, it would seem to me, because it comes from your heart and you're looking for the words for the different crowd, that it really not only comes across as just purely organic, but it probably touches people in just profound ways.
I hope so. And then they go home and they read all the essays, and then we'll hear, because we've just begun this process about a month ago, so hopefully we'll be able to get wonderful feedback from how people have really experienced the stories themselves. And I want to mention one essayist who's in our anthology. There are many, many stories, of course, and we were so fortunate to get permission from America Ferrera to print her speech from the 2017 Women's March in Washington, D.C. And we have luminaries, and we also have people who have profound stories. And one of them, Rhonda Turpin, has been in prison for almost 12 years. And she committed a very, very nonviolent offense, white-collar crime, and she doesn't say what it is. I don't know what it is. But she has been in prison fulfilling this sentence. And she says in her essay that many murderers have served fewer years in their sentences. But I will not complain because this is not the time for that. So the bravery that everyday people experience, our book is able to give just a glimmer of that. There are so many people now who cannot get out of jail because they don't have bail money. So it is an unequal system, so that the people who can rape and pillage and murder, but they have the income to get out of prison, they get a free card to get out of jail. And other people who economically cannot do that remain in this incarceration system for years. So the injustice of that is so important to recognize. And of course, I'm a huge fan of Bryan Stevenson, who equal justice system. So, there's so much that we can expound on, and yet through the anthology, the women are saying that.
I agree with you on the judicial system. I think it completely needs to be revamped. How they're doing things just doesn't make any sense. So, and I know you've touched on this a little bit about the hope and the encouragement and bringing things to light that the book, All the Women in My Family Sing, bring. What would you hope that the readers take away from this book?
Our website, allthewomeninmyfamilysing.com, talks about a call to action. And we have a page about what we can do to change this whole system, the system of publishing that's not inclusive. So the call to action is really read more women writers of color. Look at the publishing industry. If you are a woman of color and you have not thought about entering in or trying to become an editor or trying to become a publisher even, trying to be in a leadership role in publishing, think about that. But most importantly, we want women of color's voices to be included in the canon of literature. So we have a list of books that's growing daily to read, and they're nonfiction and fiction, so that we can begin to expand our knowledge about issues and people.
Well, and then that's a perfect place, allthewomeninmyfamilysing.com, where women can go and learn more about the book and how to get involved and be part of that call to action and make sure that they are picking up some of the other books that are listed there as well. So when I'd like to kind of end this a little bit on, I know you have a nonprofit, Do a Little, and I'd love for you to share with us what your nonprofit does and where we can learn more about that.
Yes, well, my nonprofit is called Do a Little, which I took from a quote from Archbishop Desmond Tutu that says, "Do your little bit of good wherever you are." It's those little bits put together that overwhelm our world. And I've been in the nonprofit world since 1998, so I have seen the needs around the world, and my mission is to serve women and girls in the areas of health, education, and happiness. So I support organizations and nonprofits that do that, and a big issue of mine is education, because I do believe that education for women is the most important tool to freedom. So I've supported different schools, different programs, and the Daraja Academy in Kenya that I've made 3 short documentary films about that are on my website, deborahsantana.com, and supported girls to have a free education at the high school level so that they can move from an impoverished existence in Kenya to going to college. That is my dream. So I've worked with Daraja Education Fund for about 8 years. And I also work with Center for Community Solutions in San Diego, which is a domestic violence nonprofit, and have worked with them for many, many years. They're the largest domestic violence and gender abuse facility in the San Diego County. So I try to just put my dollars where my heart is and help people to make a change in their lives. You know, I support trafficking organizations that stop this horrible tragedy in our country, not just in other parts of the world, but in our country. The Bay Area is a very large area for trafficking young women and young boys, but the majority is young women. So these are just the places that I try to serve, and I do it through Do a Little.
Well, you do an amazing job with that, and I'm so glad that we were able to spend this time talking about not only your books, but also your nonprofit, Do a Little. Where can our listeners connect with you and be part of your community?
I don't really have a community for my Do a Little anymore. I used to have a website, but I took it down. So really just look at deborahsantana.com, and people can email me through that site, and they can follow my blog, because I do a blog irregularly, but I do post blogs on my site also.
Well, I signed up for your community, and I highly suggest everyone do as well, and also pick up their own copy of All the Women in My Family Sing. You know, Deborah, thank you so much for taking the time to be on the show with us here today.
Thank you so much, Marianne. I'm grateful for our conversation.
Oh, it's been such a joy. Anytime you have a new book, please let us know. We'd love to have you back and talk about any of the great works that you're doing. Well, we're going to pause here for a quick break, and we'll be right back after these messages.
Internationally recognized and award-winning author Judy Goodman works and teaches outside the box of limited thinking. Working with people from every walk of life, her goal is to empower you to be the best you can be, no matter what the challenge is. Born with the gift of seeing beyond our normal vision, she has an extraordinary gift of working with every challenge. Teaching beyond conventional wisdom, her work is described as life-changing. Visit judygoodman.com. That's judygoodman.com.
Have you ever had the sense that your thoughts might actually be doing something? Ancient secrets of manifesting have been masterfully revealed in the award-winning book Manifesting 123 by Ken Elliott. For the first time, the author's experiences and stories in this book describe exactly how your thoughts can create anything. You've been doing this all your life, but it's never been fully explained for you until now. Visit manifesting123.com for more information today. Manifesting123.com.
Do you know that you can become a genius at any age? Do you know that you can change your life and create a brilliant life for yourself? Hi, I am Olympia LaPointe, an award-winning rocket scientist who you more than likely have seen on TED Talks, Impact Theory, and PBS. Check out my latest book, Answers Unleashed, The Science of Unleashing Your Brain's Power. Simply go to answersunleashed.com books and check it out for yourself. You'll find the tools to help you create the life you've always wanted.
There are nearly 2 million Americans living with amputation. Many live right here in San Antonio. Becoming an amputee can be scary, frustrating, isolating, but there's no reason to feel alone. The San Antonio Amputee Foundation is here to help support you and guide you toward resources such as home and car modifications and even prosthetic limbs. For more information or to make a donation, visit saamputee.org. We'll help you live a full, active life, one step at a time. San Antonio Amputee Foundation, healing limbs, hearts, and souls.
Welcome back to Moments with Marianne. I'm so delighted to be introducing our second guest today, Anne-Grady, and she's here to talk to us about her new book, Strong Enough. Now, Anne is an author, speaker, and a communications and leadership consultant to top companies. She has overcome trouble, trauma, and adversity beyond what many of us would ever face. So Anne's here today to share with us her book, Strong Enough, Choosing Courage, Resilience, and Triumph. So let's welcome to the show, Anne.
Marianne, thanks for having me.
What a pleasure it is to have you here, and gosh, what a great book you wrote.
Well, thank you. It was more of a practical how-to guide for me, and then it turned into a resource that I think can really help other people.
Well, and so what was the inspiration behind not only this path, but the book itself?
Well, so my story begins, I have a master's degree in organizational communication, and I was a leadership and communication consultant and speaker and trainer. And then when I had my son Evan, he's almost 15 now, nothing worked. It was a nightmare from the get-go. He had some severe challenges, and we couldn't figure out what was going on, and he first tried to kill me when he was 3. And I know that sounds hard to believe, but, I shared the introduction in my TED Talk. He charged at me with scissors because I wouldn't let him have ice cream, and he scratched me across my throat and down my arm with the scissors, and I found myself when he was about 18 months old as a single mom. He was very challenging. He cried all the time, and it created a real challenge for me just personally and professionally. And I started seeking solutions. I started trying to talk to the audiences that I was working with, really sharing Evan's challenges, not necessarily because I was trying to help anybody, but I was trying to find resources and solutions and somebody that could tell me what was going on, because the doctors didn't believe me, and it was just, kind of a nightmare on a daily basis. And he got his first diagnosis when he was 4. He was hospitalized for the first time for 2 months in a pediatric psych unit when he was 7. Then he was hospitalized again for 2 months in 2013. And when he was released, I was diagnosed with a tumor in my salivary gland. So February of 2014, I went in for what was supposed to be a routine surgery. And the tumor was actually the size of a small avocado and had stretched my facial nerve around it so much that the right side of my face was left completely paralyzed. So it looked like I'd had a stroke. My mouth couldn't close. I drooled. I had a speech impediment. I couldn't shut my eye. So a couple of days after the surgery, a speck of dust scratched my cornea. And I was then told that before I started 6 weeks of radiation, I needed to have surgery to implant a gold weight in my upper eyelid and stitch up my bottom eyelid to protect my eye. And while waiting to do that, I went on a trip to Las Vegas with my husband where I proceeded to fall down the stairs and break my foot in 4 places.
Oh, no.
So I was actually in the process of writing my first book, which came out shortly after I finished radiation. And then I started getting asked, how are you so resilient? How are you so strong? And I never felt strong, and I never felt resilient. But it turned out that I was practicing skills that were developing those things in me without even realizing I was doing it. And so while I was on that journey, I was asked to do 2 TED speeches, and I was asked to contribute to all kinds of magazines on my secrets to being resilient, which I didn't have, and I didn't know they were secrets. And so this became more of a journey of how to help other people find their strength, build resilience, and proactively navigate some of the challenges that are thrown at us by being prepared for when they do happen.
Yeah, and I can understand why these organizations have you come to speak about resilience, because it takes a lot, especially for a mom and you're, with a child that's acting out and you're trying to figure out what to do and like what resources can you use, and you have to become, resilient through that whole process and innovative and look at ways that you can make things happen.
Exactly, and I didn't realize at the time how much those skills translate to whether you're in corporate America, working with an association, in the government, school district. The same skills that it takes to build resilience muscles, as I like to call them, are the exact same things that work to engage employees and leaders and help develop teams and organizations so that, like you said, they can be innovative, they can take calculated risks, but more importantly, they can overcome the setbacks easier and use them as a catalyst rather than get buried by them.
Yeah, for sure. Well, and I know in your book you talk about, and this is something that people always talk about, they say, well, courage is the absence of fear, but you have another approach to that.
Well, I think courage is getting comfortable being uncomfortable. I used to think that I wasn't courageous. People told me I was brave, and I didn't feel that way because I was terrified and overwhelmed. And what I learned through the process is that doesn't mean you're not courageous. What makes you courageous is feeling all of that insecurity, fear, overwhelm, and doing it anyway. And so for me, it became, okay, well, what can I tactically do? It's great to have this as a theory and an idea, but what can I do specifically to build courage? What can I do to build resilience? How can I triumph over anything that comes my way? But more importantly, how can I teach other people to do that? Because there wasn't a guide for me, and I kept searching for somebody to walk me through a process that would help get me from point A to B, and there wasn't one. And that's
you
when I
came up with it.
Yeah, I did. It's invention is the mother of necessity. So I came up with a practical way to help other people do the same.
Well, especially as you're out there searching, it's interesting when we really are looking for ways to overcome, issues and look for solutions, how we end up being the front leader in regards to this. And then especially with your background, with your master's degree in organizational leadership and what have you, it just makes it probably was easy for you to kind of get everything together.
No, actually, it was when you are, I guess when you're above it or when you have a 30,000-foot view and you're able to be objective, that might be a little easier. But I'm still in it. Evan is almost 15, and we still have daily struggles. I still have holes in my sheetrock and doors that have been kicked down. And so when you're in it, it is very difficult to put everything all together. And it took a long time. It's not like I sat down and just was able to crack out, a book that detailed my journey. It was really about, while you're in it, how can you pull yourself out of it long enough to be able to figure out what's working and what's not working.
And what to do next. Yeah. Right. Just, it's interesting. People who have that organizational background tend to be really good at kind of putting things in order when it comes to things like this. I've worked with a couple other people that have that similar background, and they just excel in that area.
Well, and I think what's interesting about me is that I don't. So I excel in being able to articulate it and communicate it, but writing was never something that I looked forward to. It wasn't until I really felt that there just was a lacking resource that I sat down and created it. And so I'm sure it does come really naturally to some people, and it's not that I don't enjoy it, and it's not that it's not something that I feel like is a strength, but I think a lot of times people will come to me and say, I want to write a book, I have something I want to share, but I don't even know where to start, and that's totally normal. So I don't think it has to be something that you're not born with the strength to be able to do this or the ability to do it. It's really a set of skills that anybody can develop and harness.
Yeah, and move forward. Well, I really like in your book how you talk about courage in such a way that it really kind of breaks it down for people, and you've got the acronym for it, and so it gives people kind of a sense like, gosh, I can do this, I can overcome whatever situation I'm going through.
Well, and it's that there's not just one type of courage, right? So you can have great courage when, I know one of my girlfriends, she is fearless when it comes to traveling the world. Ever since we were in college, she would get on a plane and go somewhere she had never been by herself for a month and just explore, and that always just blew my mind. I could not imagine doing that, but yet she is terrified of a personal romantic relationship because she doesn't want to be hurt. I've got somebody else who, they do CrossFit, and they try some of the most physically taxing exercises that I have ever seen, but they don't want to have children because they're afraid. So it's not a one-size-fits-all. You've got some folks who are incredibly courageous when it comes to one area of their life and not so much in another, and it's not an all-or-nothing proposition.
Yeah, is that the thing that you see that kind of keeps people in a way kind of stuck, is fear?
Absolutely, yes. And it's not just fear, it's self-limiting beliefs. Our brain is a phenomenal organism, and if we're not careful, doesn't always have our best interests in mind. And so it's very easy for people to get really stuck in self-defeating habits, self-defeating language, fear of the unknown. And part of the reason I wrote the book is because people would just say, well, do it anyway. And that's great, but how? And that's where I came in. Here's how you do that. Here's how you overcome self-defeating habits. Here's how you break through beliefs that are keeping you stuck. Here's how you really identify and define what success looks like for you, and then go get it.
Move forward. Is that how you're teaching people and organizations to overcome adversity and to work through that?
Yes, because, the idea of overcoming obstacles and adversity, again, it's fluffy, right? When you think of people going into corporate environments or even speaking and providing keynotes on this topic, it's very well, change your attitude. Yeah, look at life differently. And that's fine, but unless you teach people how, it doesn't happen. So it's understanding the research that's been done on the brain, behavior change, individual motivation, resilience, and then applying strategies, things like mindfulness and gratitude and self-talk and self-care and expectation setting. There's a whole grouping of skills that are not something you're born with. They are things that you have to practice and become familiar and comfortable with so that you can use them when you need them.
Yeah, I'm so glad that you brought that up, because I've been to many leadership conferences where they do say, like, change your attitude. And for people that are kind of stuck, like, change your attitude or think positive thoughts when that's not something that's, that's happening in your life is really kind of a challenge. It's like, okay, well, where do I go from here then?
Well, and so as someone, I was diagnosed with clinical depression when I was 19 years old. And I didn't realize that a lot of the things that end up building resilience are things that actually help depression. And so when people would say, well, just change your attitude or see things through a different pair of glasses or just, go be optimistic. As somebody who has a brain that is wired against those things, I had to learn not only how to do them, but how to do them to an extent to where it's offsetting biological and neurological challenges. And, our use of antidepressants has gone up 400% in the last 30 years. We are the most wealthy nation in the planet, and yet we have the highest levels of suicide and self-medication and depression. And there's a reason for that, but there's also ways to combat it. And I'm not suggesting that if you do suffer from a mental health issue that you can just will your way out of it, because that's not true. And I get a lot of people who say, well, can't you just create these habits and then they can replace that? And there are some people with whom that's possible. For example, Duke did a study, and they found that if you exercise at moderate levels of intensity for 40 minutes 3 times a week, you have a 45% reduction in depressive symptoms. Another group during the same study didn't exercise. They simply took antidepressants, and they reduced depressive symptoms by 47%. So the research is pretty clear. There are things you can do to change your brain. There are things you can do to rewire the way you see the world, but that's not to take away from the fact that some people need chemical support. That's just kind of where we are.
Yeah, and everyone's so different. This isn't meant to, give anyone medical advice. They have to follow their doctor's advice.
Absolutely, and that's why I suggest strategies I share. Most of us, behavior change is very difficult, and I say that it changes one of 3 ways. You change behavior rarely, slowly, or never. And it's hard enough to change our own, let alone think we have the ability to fix other people. But I do provide a lot of strategies, because not every strategy will work for every person. Just because hot yoga and kale smoothies work really well for your best friend doesn't mean that's what's going to work for you. And so I provide lots of different options so that you can find what works.
That's good, because I know some people that wouldn't touch kale.
I know, it's like hairy spinach.
They're like, ooh, I just turned out because I heard the word kale. So
yeah, and I always joke that those people have never tried bacon.
Yeah, for sure. Well, and so on a funny note, what do lobsters have to do with all this? Because I know you've got a thing about lobsters.
And it's not from the Friends show. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
My lobster. Yeah, so lobsters have this really interesting growth strategy. So, when a lobster grows, its shell becomes constricting and tight. The shell doesn't grow with the lobster. So in order to grow, a lobster actually has to shed its shell, and it crawls under some rocks, and it hides from predators, and it's there, and it's really vulnerable, and it waits for its new shell to grow. In fact, the only way for the lobster to get bigger is for it to be vulnerable and uncomfortable while its new shell grows. And it does this sometimes 20, 30 times throughout the course of its life. Mm-hmm. And I think that there's a powerful lesson in there for us. Most of us want to grow as people, professionals, in our relationships, just as a person. And at the same time, we don't like being uncomfortable. And the lobster analogy teaches us that if you truly want to grow, you do have to get uncomfortable. Discomfort is the catalyst, and we run from it, we try to numb it, we try to hide from it. Unless we find a way to embrace that discomfort and that vulnerability, it is incredibly difficult to grow.
Yeah. Well, what a great analogy, because it is, you look at this and it's like, gosh, they do have this hard shell, and to be able to make that growth, they really have to become vulnerable. And a lot of us probably need to do that in our own lives as well.
Yep. For sure.
Well, we talked about courage, and so I know you say that there's 7 different types of courage. So, and we've kind of gone over a few of them. So when, how can we discover which courage it is that we have, and then, how are we using this to the best of our ability?
Well, I don't know if there's one way to figure it out. I do provide a self-assessment so that you can identify what your natural tendencies gravitate toward. But I think it's taking time to do some self-reflection. For example, what are your triggers? So we all have knee-jerk reactions to things that it might be people, it might be an issue or a topic, it could be a time of day, a lot of different things. But what is it that triggers you? And you have been triggered when your heart starts racing, your palms sweat. Think about a near car accident, which I'm sure all of your listeners have been in. When that happens, you have this sudden rush of cortisol and adrenaline, and it's meant to be a protection mechanism, but it triggers a physiological and psychological response. Translate that into your life. What is it that triggers those types of responses from you? Because when you start identifying them, you can start proactively managing them. So if it's a relationship and you're afraid of getting hurt, what is it about that that's so scary for you? How do you know it's happening? If it's physical, I have never been an overly athletic person. Dodgeball used to do that for me in school. I would get a guttural, visceral reaction to it. What was it that was so scary about that for me? Is it money, right? It could be finance. It could be creativity. It could be a variety of things, but it's starting to be aware and mindful and curious about what excites you and creates that level of positive energy and what drains you and creates that level of negative energy, and being aware of where that is so that you can start to look for patterns.
And then the patterns will teach you where that is.
Yes, because if you're someone who, let's say, here's a personal example, right? So I'm highly extroverted. I'm a professional speaker. I speak to thousands and thousands of people over the course of a year. I hate networking events. Now, I still have to do them, and it's still something that's necessary, but the idea of going to meet strangers and have small talk and try to interrupt people while they're speaking to join the conversation so that you're not awkwardly standing alone, that's incredibly anxiety-provoking for me. And it wasn't until I started to ask myself why and what I was really afraid of and what was causing that anxiety that I was able to start managing it proactively. Now, it doesn't mean it goes away. I still feel that every time I have to go to a networking event. But being aware of it and knowing what's happening, why it's happening, and what I can do in response to it is very powerful.
And when you realize that, are you finding that anxiety kind of diminishes over time?
I don't know if it diminishes over time. It diminishes faster while you're in the situation. And I think over time it will. I've really just started to understand this particular aspect of my own personality and myself. And so for me, I haven't gotten to the point yet where it's become a habit enough to where it takes away the anxiety. But when I'm in the situation, I now have tools to manage it so that it doesn't stifle me and it doesn't cripple me.
Well, that's perfect. And at least it gives people a starting place. They can kind of, because I know with the self-assessment, they can kind of look at that and determine where they're at and kind of move and grow through that. You have this whole chapter, and I want to kind of toggle over to this now. You have this whole chapter on resilience. So how does that play a part? And a lot of people look at resilience, I think, in different ways.
So resilience is your ability to overcome obstacles and setbacks and to get up stronger as a result. Resilience is your ability to have really cruddy stuff happen to you and rise above it. Resilience is your ability to believe that you can overcome the setbacks that are thrown your way. And again, when people told me I was resilient, I didn't understand truly what that meant. And it wasn't until I shared my story and the catastrophe of errors that is, my background, until some guy said, "Man, Anne, I thought my life was crappy, and then I met you, and now I feel way better." Like, is that a compliment? Man. But it is a series of skills. Resilience is not built at a spa. It is not built on a perfectly wonderful spring day. It's built when you're down and you're tired and you feel beaten up. That's when resilience is built. However, what I found along the way is that there are things you can do proactively to build resilience so that when you do experience a setback, you're able to rise up faster, you're able to get up stronger, you're able to know that you have the tools to navigate whatever it might be.
Well, it kind of gauges. So can people, use their resilience muscle and kind of strengthen that, where they are overcoming difficulties a little bit better, or they're able to move through things a little bit faster?
Yes, 100%. Hands down. You can build that muscle, and that's why I wanted to provide a guide of how to do it. So what can you do every day, every week, every month, every quarter, every year to continue to build that? And research is really clear. Our resilience is directly linked to our well-being. Our brain and the way we process the world is most of our well-being. Our outlook and the way we choose to frame situations, the way we talk to ourselves, the way we care for ourselves, the way we care for others, what we do to manage our emotions and regulate those, all of those are skills, and we get so busy being busy, and we get so busy in life that it's easy to look up and go, I don't have time to do any of that stuff. But the reason you can't is the reason you need to. It's not easy. If it were easy, everybody would do these things. It's a job. It is difficult, but it is doable.
Well, and for people that are in situations where giving up isn't an option, your book really provides a lot of just kind of support and hope that they can move through that.
Well, and that's what was hard for me, because I can't just quit, Evan. I can't just quit my health, right? So I would go to support groups for battered women, and my question was, what if you can't leave your abuser? I can't leave. What do I do? And that's where I really found strength in some of these strategies. And then the more research I did, the more I found that they don't just work for individuals. They translate to teams. They translate to leadership. They translate to employee engagement and more effective, higher-level performing organizations. So it's fascinating to me that the same skills that can build your strength and courage and resilience are the same ones that, if you extrapolate that to teams and companies, they help manage failure. They help get back up from setbacks. They help you communicate more effectively. It helps build relationships. And so that was really what was promising for me. The best leaders, the most effective people are those that fail on purpose, because they know that they can't grow without that level of discomfort. And it's taking risks, and it's trying things even if you don't know it'll work, and it's trying things even when you know it might not work, and continuing to look for solutions that can help you grow that resilience, grow that strength, grow that courage.
In your book, Strong Enough, you discuss how stress affects our bodies, our mind. Why don't you share a little bit about that with us?
Sure. Well, stress is toxic, and we are in an age where it is never diminishing. So, in days of old, we had what's called an acute stressor. A saber-toothed tiger would run after us. That is a very acute stressor. And when the tiger's gone, the stress is gone. However, now we live in an age where we are inundated with technology and media. We have information overload. We are in a constant state of trying to do more with less, and a state of trying to balance ourselves personally and professionally. And whereas the stress used to be acute, now it's more chronic, and it's something that people can't escape from. And it actually changes your brain. So when you are under stress, your brain produces cortisol and adrenaline and noradrenaline and norepinephrine. And it does this as a survival mechanism, because when the tiger was running at you, we needed to either fight or freeze or run away. And so when we are under stress, blood drains from our brain and goes into our limbs, and it's preparing us to fight. It's preparing us to freeze. It's preparing us to run away. Well, as we have evolved as a species, our brain hasn't caught up with us yet. And so our brain still takes things as a threat, and it doesn't have to be the tiger. It could be a snarky email from our boss. It could be getting thrown under the bus in a meeting. It could be having a fight with our significant other. The same type of neurochemistry happens, and it decreases the gray matter of your brain, which is the part of your brain that's responsible for emotional regulation, problem solving, and decision making. And the great thing about our brain is that you can repair those areas damaged by stress, but you have to proactively manage it. And, most doctors, most physicians would tell you that stress is the leading cause of illness. It's the leading cause of heart disease. It's the leading cause of high blood pressure. And even cancer. I truly believe that my tumor was a result of stress. And our body can't process it as fast as it's coming at us unless we learn the skills to do it.
Yeah, and be able to move through that, because, again, it's not like you can just leave. These are things you have to do, and for people who are in work environments, most people don't want to leave. They want to be able to work through whatever it is that they're going through.
Right, and whether it's a difficult personality that you're dealing with, or trying to meet deadlines and deliverables, or navigating a relationship with your manager, or being considered for a promotion, all of those things, even if a lot of the stress is productive and positive, it still has the same effect on the brain. So it's teaching your brain how to use those chemicals and those triggers and those stressors as a way to overcome them. But you can't most of us don't learn it by accident. It's something that you have to practice, and it means that you have to stop long enough to figure out what's working and what's not working. Most of us change for one of two reasons. We're either inspired or we're desperate. And unfortunately, the vast majority of us wait until we're desperate, until we don't have a choice anymore. You hear about people who have had a heart attack, and that's what triggers them to eat healthier or to exercise more. You hear about people who've had a relative diagnosed with cancer, so they stop smoking. There are very few times when we make changes because we're doing it through inspiration, and that is really where the magic lies.
So what are some of the strategies that you suggest that people use to kind of manage their stress levels?
Well, first, it's figuring out what causes it. It's what are your triggers? How do you know you've been triggered? What happens to you physically, psychologically? What is it that you experience that lets you know you are stressed? Because only when you become aware of it can you pay attention in the moment. And so that's number one. But there are things like mindfulness, which I would have told you was the silliest thing ever. I would have totally dismissed it. If people told me to meditate, I just kind of laughed it off, because I thought, all right, well, when I sit still and I try to breathe, I always go to, who did I forget to call? And what am I going to have for dinner? And why is my leg itching? And I would just get really fed up with it. And I thought you had to sit in a full lotus position and eat tofu and find your inner zen. And I could not have been more wrong. And practicing mindfulness, let's say it's meditation is one way to practice mindfulness, and you focus on your breath. Well, your mind should wander. That means it's working. And every time you catch your mind wandering to what you're going to have for dinner or why somebody looked at you funny, and you just kind of let it go and go back to your breathing, that strengthens that muscle. It increases gray matter, and it helps with emotional regulation. So you can start to feel yourself in the moment when you are getting stressed, to start using those strategies, like taking deep breaths. So this weekend we had an issue with my son where I found myself being triggered. My heart was racing, my stomach was in knots, and normally I would just react my way through that. But since learning these skills, I was able to sit down and take 3 really deep breaths, and that's all it takes to reset your nervous system. And I was able to meditate for 5 minutes, clear my head, and go manage it strategically rather than dealing with it reactively. So that's an example. Gratitude. It reduces cortisol by 23%. Again, it seems touchy-feely, but more than any other factor, it's been linked to well-being. Now, those who practice gratitude are healthier, they sleep better, they have less depression, they're perceived as more trustworthy, they have reduced envy, higher empathy, better sleep, mood, and alertness, more optimistic, more productive. They make friends easier, and you change your brain. So maybe your listeners can relate to this. Think about when you dated someone and you thought that person could be the one. Like, they just seemed like they could be it. Everything they do is adorable, and it all supports that idea that this person could be the one. But somewhere along the line in the relationship, you figure out they're not the one, and everything they do drives you crazy. Like, watching them eat makes you nauseous. And it's because you've started looking for those things. We find what we look for. We can train our brain when we practice gratitude and we look for positive. We're actually reversing the way our brain is supposed to work. So if you think about it, our survival mechanism, if I'm walking down a path and I see a snake and a beautiful flower, my brain magnifies the snake and dismisses the flower as a protection mechanism. And our brain has something that's called a negativity bias, and it basically means that negative is like Velcro and positive is Teflon. And if you've ever gotten a performance review or feedback where you had 20 positive comments and 1 negative, what's the one you always focus on?
It's always the negative.
Right. And so you can train your brain to start searching for positive through utilizing gratitude strategies, and it makes a significant difference. And that was something that I started practicing. So I collect what I call delicious moments. I'm staring at it right now in my office. It's a board of amazing moments that I want to savor, whether it's a picture or I wrote on an index card that I had a wonderful meal with a good friend, or it's a ticket to an event that I really enjoyed, or a drawing, or anything. It's collecting those moments so that you remember to focus on them.
What a lovely way to start your day, to be able to look at something like that and go, gosh, I'm so grateful for all these things that, they're in my life, all the things I enjoy. It really does set things in a whole different light.
Yes, it does. And something that simple as journaling for 5 minutes every morning and every evening can have crazy positive effects on your health, your physical health, not only your mental health, but it's directly linked to well-being. So something as simple as waking up and thinking about some things that you appreciate, whether it's the fact that you have a warm bed to sleep in, or that you had a good dream, or that sip of coffee, the first sip of coffee, it's smelling it before you taste it and just savoring that. There are things that we take for granted, but in doing so, we prevent ourselves from building resilience. And this is stuff that I've really just learned and did not know, but practiced unintentionally, and it makes a world of difference.
Well, it's so nice that you blaze the trail for the rest of us, right?
Well, I don't know about that. I mean, nothing that I write or teach is new. The idea of meditation and mindfulness and gratitude and exercise and self-care, none of those concepts are new. And it was actually, I had a doctor when I was really struggling with my depression who said, well, do you want to feel better? And I said, well, yeah, I want to feel better. And he said, well, are you willing to do what it takes to feel better? And I said, well, what does it take? And he said, try eating better, exercising, and getting enough sleep. And I thought, no, I'm not willing to do that. It's like the common sense stuff. Like, you're supposed to do those things, but it's the last thing you want to do when you feel like crap. So I finally said, all right, I'm desperate enough to where I will give it a shot. And I started swimming, which made me want to eat better, which made me sleep better. And it was absolutely mind-blowing how much of a difference I experienced in as little as 6 weeks. I mean, dramatically different. The medication didn't change. The therapy didn't change. What changed was eating, sleeping, and exercising. And I kiboshed those ideas for so long because I thought, oh my gosh, that's just, yeah, I get it, but I didn't get it. You know, it's a difference between knowing it and doing it, and really taking time to figure out, am I desperate enough for a different result that I'm willing to think and behave differently in order to get there? Or do I just need to settle for the result I'm getting because I don't want to think and behave differently?
You know, it's interesting. A lot of people who are in the corporate world think that way. You know, they're like, oh, mindfulness, that sounds like a bunch of mumbo-jumbo. I don't know if I'm going to really do that. And it's interesting, once you put these things into place, how much they really do make an impact.
They do, and you know, Aetna instituted mindfulness training, and the amount of productivity increase and stress decrease and illness decrease that they found is absolutely unrefutable. And since then, many programs have been put into place where you do have a mindfulness room, or you do have a way to just step back from the job and take a walk, or gyms that are located in office buildings, or little things like not eating lunch at your desk, which is something we think we're saving so much time, but we actually become less productive as a result of it. The science and the results are absolutely unequivocal. These are strategies that make you more effective at work and at home.
Now, so when you do your keynote speaking, is mindfulness something that's part of the keynotes that you do?
It depends on the keynote. So I still speak quite a bit about communication and leadership and influence, and there are different skills involved with managing conflict and having difficult conversations. But whenever I'm talking about strength or resilience or creating resilient leaders and teams, then yes, it is, because you cannot overlook the importance of it, and you can't dismiss it. And so I actually take participants through an exercise, and it is a simple exercise, but once you do it, you understand. It's really, I would suggest if you have listeners that started where I did, which is I had no idea how to meditate. I mean, I just kiboshed it for so long that I didn't even try it. I downloaded an app, and there are half a dozen apps that are great at helping you figure out how to do it, and then you can continue to use them if you want, or you can end up doing it on your own, or you can hire a coach, or you can go to group classes. There are many, many ways to practice it, but people who do are healthier and happier.
Oh, yeah, there's so many resources out there for meditating, thank goodness. And it's interesting because it's not like how you said, initially, expect to sit in lotus and eat tofu and, all of a sudden maybe you're wearing tie-dye. It's a way of being able to just kind of control and calm your mind, which is kind of nice.
Yeah, and the goal of it is to just not engage in the thoughts. So you still have the thoughts. We still have the craziness running around our brain. The practice of meditation and mindfulness is to not engage those so that you are able to regulate more effectively. So it doesn't mean you don't get angry, and it doesn't mean you don't get sad, and it doesn't mean that you don't have really crappy days. You do. It means when you have them, you have practiced and built skills to help keep that in perspective and to help minimize the discomfort that comes as a result of it.
Yeah, I know when I first started meditating, it was like, okay, I'm sitting here. Oh, shoot, I'm thinking. I'm not supposed to be thinking. How long has it been? Oh, I've got to start getting dinner together. I'm like, oh, shoot, I have to get back to not thinking. So it's
There's an old saying, everybody should meditate 15 minutes a day unless you don't have time to meditate, and then you should meditate for 30 minutes a day. And I sit down often. I'm a very type A personality. I'm very achievement-oriented, goal-oriented, and so for me, sitting down and trying to quiet my mind is really, really challenging. It seems like it wouldn't be that hard, but for me, it's really an exercise, and it's reserving time in your day to do that. I recently heard an interview by one of the world's leading meditation experts, and she said 9 minutes a day is the magic number that changes your brain.
I like that number.
Yep.
And I think most people do, too. They're like, I can do 9 minutes,
Yeah, when you think about I hear people all the time say, I don't have time to do that. Well, the average American spends a year of their life trying to figure out what to watch on TV. I mean, if I took the time I spend trying to figure out what to binge on Netflix and I use that time meditating, you can make the time.
Oh, and what a change it'd make in your life, too.
Yep.
Well, you touched on this a little bit earlier, and you talked about gratitude, and you were talking about how you use it with corporations and different things like that. How does it make us stronger and happier?
So it changes the focus of what you're looking for. Gratitude, they just did a study. They found 2,000 managers, and they asked them how important they thought gratitude was to practice. And unanimously, they agreed that gratitude in the workplace is critical. Yet only 10% of those people reported actually expressing thanks to peers, direct reports, clients, whatever, on any given day. It plays a huge role in emotional regulation, which is a key facet of resilience. It's really your ability to start finding the good and appreciating it. And Dr. Robert Emmons is a researcher, and he is probably one of the leading researchers on gratitude. And he found that in every measure of success, people who practiced gratitude were more effective. So it helps you sleep better. It helps your mood. It helps you stay alert. It changes your ability to solve problems and make decisions more effectively because you're changing your brain and the way that it functions. And what's interesting is that there's a saying in brain science, what fires together, wires together. Mm-hmm. So the more you engage in a certain behavior, the easier it is for that behavior to become a habit. Your brain doesn't know the difference between a good habit or a bad habit. So it doesn't know the difference between complaining and looking for all the reasons your life sucks or trying to find reasons why you have a great life or why things will turn around. And so you start training your brain to look for those things, and it becomes easier over time to do it. And then when you're faced with adversity or a setback, you have the tools to regulate your emotion more effectively, to tamp down your stress response, to focus on solutions rather than just problems. And it's really powerful. I had no idea. It's the number one predictor of well-being. Those who practice gratitude have a really big advantage. It helps you bounce back. It increases optimism levels by 5 to 15%. And because resilient people do proactively generate positive emotions, they practice training their brain to do so. So it's a way to reduce stress symptoms. And what's fascinating, the most powerful thing for me was that you don't even have to find anything to be grateful for. The simple act of looking increases serotonin and dopamine. And those are the same neurochemicals that are in antidepressants. The simple act of looking. And it reduces cortisol by 23%. So it's helping with your health, both mental and physical. It's helping you regulate emotion. It lowers blood pressure, depression, increases sleep. I mean, it's a powerful thing. And it could be as simple as taking time to thank somebody for holding a door for you and really appreciate it. I bought a woman a cup of coffee at Starbucks, and she started to cry, and I said, what did I do? And she said, it's my birthday, and you're the only one who remembered. I didn't even know who she was. So, and it made my whole day, and doing for others is another thing. Service for others is another resilience-building strategy that can't be appreciated, because it's the single, they say that a good deed or doing something for others is the single most increase in well-being of any other activity that you can do.
Well, it sure is. I mean, kind of like how you started off initially saying, these people were coming to you going, gosh, I thought my life was really tough until I, read your story. I mean, a lot of times we don't really get into appreciation about all the great things that we have until we realize that, there are other people that are struggling, going through a much difficult journey.
Well, but I want to caution your listeners against comparative suffering, and that's basically saying, well, my situation is tough, but it's nothing compared to my friend. Yeah. Or my situation is difficult, but wow, I thought I had it bad. This person has it way worse. So So comparative suffering is an exercise in futility. We all struggle at 100%. Whatever you're going through is very real for you. So don't look at your situation and minimize it because it's not as bad as somebody else's situation. Appreciate it for what it is. Know that it's difficult for you, and then take time to proactively manage ways out of it.
That's great advice.
You can't change the situation. You can only change your response to it.
Yeah. Move forward. Well, what if we have to deal with difficult conversations with people? I'm sure a lot of people can feel like, oh, my stress level is rising, I'm getting anxious, regardless if it's at home or work or with friends. How can people prepare themselves for something like that?
Well, I do teach tactical communication skills, things that people can use to understand their style and their approach and be able to understand the style of others and modify the way they communicate. But an overarching message that has really served me well is the question, am I trying to be right or get it right? Mm-hmm. Most of us say we want to get it right, but what we mean is I want to be right in the process. And I'll give you an example. Let's say you have a coworker who asks you a question in an email that you've already answered. Well, most of us get frustrated. Our heart races. We get frustrated, why can't they read the original email I sent? Why is it my job to have to retype the original message? So what do? We go back to our sent items. We copy and paste the original message so that they know that we have already done it. And we're taking a little bit of a jab passive-aggressively. Now, is that trying to get it right or be right? Well,
yeah.
Is it getting you closer to the goal, which is a better relationship with this person? Probably not. So if it's not, don't do it. That's the question you have to ask yourself, is what I'm doing going to get me closer toward reaching my goal? And if it's not, stop doing it. Most of us, our ego gets in the way. We want to be right. And that is something that can improve our relationship significantly.
Well, and so what are some final thoughts you'd like to leave our listeners with? Of course, they want to go pick up their own copy of Strong Enough, but what are some other thoughts you want to leave them with in regards to if they're having a difficult time, maybe at work or at home?
Well, I want to back up for just a second because I think that when we're younger, we read these great fairy tales and they all end with, and they live happily ever after. And when we are then launched into the real world where we have setbacks or where marriages fail or children get sick or there are bills you can't pay or a promotion you don't get, our natural instinct is to go, but wait a minute, I thought I was supposed to live happily ever after. This isn't what I thought it was going to be. I must not be doing something right. And I think the bigger overarching message is happiness is not a constant state. Nobody is happy all of the time. If they tell you they are, they're lying. And you shouldn't be happy all of the time. That's not what life is. Life is about selecting those moments, those delicious moments where you feel really good, and starting to focus your energy on those, because the negative stuff is going to happen. The most successful people are the ones who embrace it and say, okay, what do I learn from it? How do I use it? How do I take the lesson so that when I'm confronted with the same stuff, I don't get, buried by it. And that's really, it's the finding ways to continually progress, to learn from what you go through rather than sweep it under the rug and just pray it doesn't come back.
Yeah. Yeah, at least, I look at, just these different situations that, myself, everyone else kind of goes through, and I think your book is just not only so timely, but such a great resource and such great help for people to look at their situations, assess it, and move forward.
Thank you. I appreciate that. That was the goal.
Well, you did well. You did well there. So where can our listeners connect with you and learn, more about your book and be part of your community?
Sure. Well, everything is Anne-Grady Group, and my name has an E, A-N-N-E, GradyGroup.com. So anne-grady-group.com is my website. You can sign up for newsletters, read blog posts and articles. There's even a free download for a communication style inventory if you want to get a better idea of your communication style and how you work well with others. There are articles. And you can also pick up a copy of the book there, or you can get both of my books on Amazon.com.
Well, thank you, Anne. It's been such a pleasure to spend this time with you today and talk about your book. What a huge resource that is to so many people, and I'm glad we got to spend this time together. Well, we're at the end of our time today. I would like to thank everyone for tuning in. You've been listening to Moments with Marianne. And remember, make every moment count.
In a single moment, your life can change. Moments with Marianne is a transformative hour that covers an endless array of topics with the best of the best. Her guests are leaders in their fields, ranging from inspirational authors, top industry leaders, and business and spiritual entrepreneurs. Each guest is gifted and a true visionary, a recognized leader in her own work, and while teaching others to develop, refocus, and grow, Marianne will bring the best guest and sometimes a special surprise. Don't miss this. You never know just which moment will change your life forever. Moments with Marianne airs every Thursday, Friday, and Sunday at 8 p.m. Eastern, 6 p.m. Mountain Time. Make sure to tune in and visit momentswithmarianne.com for more information.